What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Sloppy Saturdays. And today we are finally doing our combine recap. We have covered this combine for you guys throughout this combine. We talked about the QBs, running backs, receivers that we believe have the most to gain, which I think we really hit the nail on the head with most of it. A lot of these guys on this list that we predicted to have the most standout combines, the most impactful combines, all pretty much did. So if you watched that video beforehand and you looked out for them, I'm very happy you guys had your eyes on the right people. Today we were talking about, again, a lot of people I think impressed me in this NFL Combine. Obviously, we know when we talk about the NFL Combine, and as we will with the pro days, like this channel loves to cover everything. We love this time of year, the NFL draft, where we see our favorite college players join the NFL. But again, we have to take everything with consideration. Combine for a lot of these guys does not mean much. I think the combine is really good, in my opinion, for players that we could have believed have slipped through the cracks and then they absolutely tear up the combine. I think it could definitely up those players' draft stocks. But then again, a lot of players like an Avril Reese or David Bailey, guys that are, again, at the top of the draft, I don't think it really does much for them because the eyes were already on them all year. They are that decorated as prospects. So we're going to talk about everything. Now, where do I want to start off? We'll start off pretty hot. We'll start off with Brendan Thompson. Brendan Thompson runs the fastest 40. He solidifies himself as the fastest player in this NFL Combine. But I personally do not think it means much for him. When we look at Brendan Thompson, he's a 5'9", 170-pound receiver, a guy that started out at Oklahoma. Then he makes his way to Mississippi State. I don't think this means much for Brendan Thompson. I understand he's the fastest player at 4.26. But I do not believe Brendan Thompson was developed right in his college football career. If he ran this 4.26 and say he had the ability to punt return and kick return, I think that would have done so much for his NFL stock and would have made this 4.26 so meaningful. But at 5'9", 170 pounds, only being able to be a receiver and only had 4 carries this year rushing the football, I don't know how impactful he could be as an NFL player. Now, maybe this got him from the 5th, 6th round to the 4th round. Could be a possibility, but me personally, I would not even draft this guy in the 4th round because not only does he have limitations with his size and his route running, he's not used as an extension of the running game very much, and he's not able to punt or kick return kicks. Now, again, if I was Brendan Thompson, I would possibly learn in year 1, year 2 how to punt and return kicks, and if I was a team that was drafting him, I would definitely experiment in that sense. But again, you're looking at a guy that ran the fastest 40 in the NFL Combine with not only height and weight limitations, but limitations on what he could do at the speed. And again, when you look at guys that were smaller in stature in their NFL career coming into the league, whether it was a Deshaun Jackson out of Cal, whether it was a Tyreek Hill out of, JUCO and Oklahoma State, these guys who were smaller in stature, even though they became really good receivers, they came into the league ready to punt and return kicks. Because again, if you have this blazing speed and you have these limitations at receiver, you got to be able to extend your game. Brendan Thompson did not do that, in my opinion, throughout his college career. Again, to not be able to return kicks at his size and develop to that, I think this 4.26 doesn't mean much to me. Again, I think it gets him 100% drafted. You make the headlines as the fastest player in the NFL Combine. Teams are going to find a way to use you on the field, but I just think they're going to be very limited in the ways they do that. Brendan Thompson runs the fastest time. Credit to him, but this year, again, the guy running the fastest time, I don't think it necessarily means much. I really don't. I'm jumping all over the place. Again, like I said, I'm not going from position group to position group. I'm just jumping into whatever I think feels right, whatever I have the hottest take on. We're going to get into Drew Aller. I think Drew Aller absolutely killed this combine, completely up his draft stock. If anybody knows me, Drew Aller is a guy that I absolutely love. For 2 years, I've been talking about him. Going into this year, I thought he was the best quarterback in college football. Obviously, things just went flat out wrong for Drew Aller in Penn State. Head coach James Franklin gets fired. He gets injured early in the year. They lose a monster game to Oregon, and that's really where their team spiraled. But Drew Aller, I think, again, when he came into this NFL Combine, he looked like the most impressive quarterback from start to finish. Again, when we look at prototypical NFL size, A-plus size at 6'5", 228 pounds, and then he jumps in this combine, and he looks like the most impressive passer out of anybody in this combine. And that's exactly what Drew Aller needs to do. He had perfect touch on deep balls when we look at a couple of 60-plus yard deep balls that were right on the money. He was even great on outbreaking routes as well. And for somebody that Drew Aller, like, people hammer the inconsistency, he looked like the best quarterback throwing the football, in my opinion, in this whole combine. Exactly what he needed to do after coming off this injury. And for Drew Aller, like I said, consistently on this channel, somebody with the capital that he has. When we look at a guy last year that was projected slotted number 2 to the Browns, so this is a guy that was looked at a first rounder at one time. Not only that, obviously an A-plus recruit. Then you also look for him as well as playing on a premier team at Penn State, a guy that went to the college football semifinals one year. I think Drew Aller just got a complete unfair shake, and things went as bad as it could possibly go for him. Again, like I said, first-round capital, stays another year in college, gets hurt. They have a disaster season, but Drew Aller, a guy that people hammered inconsistencies for, I don't think this guy was as inconsistent as people think because, again, he never had an elite receiver in college football. Obviously, had Tyler Warren, but the receivers were never the best around him at Penn State. Anybody that follows Penn State does know that. And then, again, this guy was, again, middle 60s completion percentage for a career, for a quarterback. I think that's something you could definitely work on. But for Drew Aller, like I said, I think he did exactly what he needed to do in a weak quarterback class where, again, he had the capital last year to go in the first round. He comes in after an injury, looks like by far the most impressive quarterback in this combine with what he was able to do throwing the football. Like I said, the touch on the deep balls were phenomenal. And on the outbreaking routes, too. Again, Drew Aller looked like the most physically gifted quarterback there, pretty much outside of Taylor Green, and he looked the most impressive throwing the football. I think Drew Aller is going to have this ceiling now where he's going to go in the third round, in my opinion. He could possibly even go in the second round. And I think that's exactly what Drew Aller was trying to prove in this week quarterback class. Like I said, he's more physically gifted than the top 2 quarterbacks in this draft by far. I think he's a guy that was slipping through the cracks because, again, the season went worse as possible as it could. But for a guy that was formerly looked at as a first-round quarterback, I don't think anybody should give up on Drew Aller just yet. Drew Aller did exactly what I wanted him to do as a huge fan of him. And, again, the Drew Aller hate club is going to keep on hating, but I absolutely love what Drew Aller did in this combine. Now I also want to talk about a running back that I believe has kind of slipped through the cracks. We're going to talk about Mike Washington Jr. Mike Washington Jr. ran a 4.33 which was the fastest for running backs in this combine. And I think he absolutely skyrocketed his draft capital because when we look at the running back draft class outside of Jeremiah Love, does not have much depth. And the biggest thing with Mike Washington Jr. as well is how versatile he could possibly be in the NFL. With this 4.33 40 time, I think it means even more for a guy like him because we're looking at a guy that's 6 foot tall and 228 pounds. So he's a guy that could run in between the tackles with this 40 time. I think it's phenomenal. Now, the biggest thing with Mike Washington Jr. is when he gets to that top end speed. Again, I think he's kind of slow getting to that speed. And again, I think he could be more effective in between the tackles. But he's a guy that when he gets to the outside, he is gone. Again, he had just over 1,000 yards rushing, but I do think that's not something you do want to necessarily look at because he did run 6.4 average yard per carry, which is one of the top in college football. So, again, he didn't get a lot of carries this season, but he did make the most of them. Like I said, Mike Washington Jr. in a weak running back class, running the top 40 time, but also being the stature that he is with the ability to run between tackles, he shows how versatile he is and how he possibly has slipped through the cracks. And like I said, with the depth in this running back class not being top end, we could see this guy being a top 3 running back take. And I think he absolutely killed the combine with this 40 time. So that's somebody I definitely did want to take care of. Also with Mike Washington Jr., I forgot to mention as well, he is able to catch the football. We saw 28 receptions for over 200 yards. So, again, I think he's versatile enough. I just think it's developing him, again, maybe a little bit better in between the tackles, maybe getting to that top end speed a little faster for him. But Mike Washington Jr. in a weak running back class outside of Jeremiah Love, I think this was exactly what was needed for him. And very different from a Brendan Thompson. I think this guy running a top-end 40-time actually does mean a lot for him because, like I said, at his stature and what he's able to do on a football field, it is going to translate and expand his game. I absolutely love that. Another 2 guys I do want to talk about very quickly is Jeff Caldwell and Bryce Lance. Bryce Lance, a guy with over 1,000 yards at NDSU. He's the brother of Trey Lance, so obviously he's from a premier athletic tree. Then we look at Jeff Caldwell as well, a guy that went from smaller programs. He played for Cincinnati this year. He only had 400 yards. But when we look at these guys, they had a premier NFL combine. When we look at Jeff Caldwell and Bryce Lance, only 2 players that have a 99 NGS athletic score. Now, they both run 4.35 40s. They had 40-inch verticals. And then they're also 6'3 or above. So, again, you're looking at premier athletes. Now, again, I think they definitely up the eyes on them. And this is where I feel like the combine is most impactful. When you look at these premier athletes that possibly have slipped through the cracks, these are guys now that definitely cemented themselves as NFL draft prospects, whether it's going to be in the 4th, 5th, or 6th round for them, that's going to be a big thing. Now, when we're looking at Jeff Cadwell and Bryce Lance, you're looking at two guys that, again, need a lot of help route running for sure. But when you look at guys that are as fast as they are, at the height they are, we all know NFL eyes, NFL scouts, NFL GMs are definitely going to look at them with potential. And again, to be able to work at route running is something that you can develop. Again, going into the NFL, you obviously want these premier route runners. That's what translates. But when you look at 6'3", running 4.35 40s, these are guys that, again, those are things you can't buy when you look at NFL receivers. So I think, again, at their height, at their weight, at their speed, like, these are guys that 100% put NFL teams on notice, and they're going to be drafted in the back end of the NFL draft for sure, whether it's 4th, 5th, 6th round. Out of the two of them, I do believe in Bryce Lance a little bit more coming from NDSU because, again, at least he had the production over 1,000 yards. Jeff Cadwell did have over 1,000 yards in 2024 in the small school that he played for. But, again, in Cincinnati, he only had sub 400 yards. So I think Bryce Lance would translate a little easier just based on his production. Another Lance, again, it is crazy, like some of these family trees, like when we look at Bryce Lance, Trey Lance, when we look at Sonny Styles, Lorenzo Styles, like these guys, the genes they have are absolutely phenomenal. Now, I'm not doubting their work ethic. I think they all definitely work hard, but wow, it's absolutely insane. Two guys, like I said, this is where the combine matters for some of these prospects. Some of these athletic guys that have possibly fallen through the cracks. I think Jeff Cadwell and Bryce Lance really solidified themselves as NFL draft picks with these combines. Again, the height, the speed, you just can't buy that. Where do I want to go now? We could talk about very briefly Sonny Styles and Avril Reese because I already discussed both of them on my Sonny Styles video. If you didn't check my Sonny Styles dedicated video on his combine, we released that basically right when it happened. Sonny Styles absolutely killed the combine, an athletic freak. When we look at Sonny Styles, his ability to play all over the field, he started out as a safety. Then he obviously had to move from safety because Caleb Downs transferred over from Alabama. Then again in 2024, when they won the national championship, he was heavily used as a blitzer linebacker. This year, he was used as a zone linebacker. So somebody that was able to be used all over the field, has this experience playing all over the field, and obviously is a premier athlete. When we look at NFL combines, he definitely had one of the most historic combines. But surprisingly for Sonny Styles, I do think it didn't really do much for him in the sense of draft stock. I had Sonny Styles as a top 10 pick. I think I had him going 10 to Cincinnati in our mock draft. I do think he could go as high as 7, but I think this definitely put a little more eyes on him. But for Sonny Styles, like I said, I do think there are going to be a set number of defensive players that are going to go ahead of him and a set number of players that are going to go ahead of him. I think Avril Reese, his teammate, is definitely going to go ahead of him. I do think he was the best linebacker on this Ohio State team for sure. Again, the difference with Avril Reese, he's versatile. He crushed his position for 3 years, and he has the ability to play the edge, which Sonny Styles does not. And we look at edge rushing being a premier position. Avril Reese is going to try to mold into that Micah Parsons type role, which is definitely what the modern day NFL is looking for. Avril Reese running this 4.46, very similar to Sonny Styles, super impactful. But like I said, going back to Sonny Styles, I just think there's a set number of players that are definitely going to go ahead of him. And like I said, Avril Reese, his teammate, I think is going to go ahead of him. I do think David Bailey is going to go ahead of him, and we are going to talk about in a moment. Who else? I think Caleb Downs is definitely going to go ahead of him, being that generational safety prospect, that plug-and-play great player. Obviously, outside of defensive players, you do have a Fernando Mendoza that's obviously going to go with the number 1 pick. I do think Francis Mauigoa is going to go to the Cardinals at 3. I do think he's the best tackle. So, again, you just have this crop of players that are basically guaranteed to go ahead of him. And I think, again, for these defensive players that I mentioned, whether it's an Avril Reese, whether it's a David Bailey, whether it's a Caleb Downs, I do think those players should go ahead of him. I do think they're plug-and-play, ready NFL guys for the most part. Obviously, Avril Reese, again, he's going to try to expand his game in the NFL. He's definitely more of an upside guy. But, again, I think those guys who crushed their position for 3 years, who don't need much development as a Sonny Styles needs. And then, again, also with Sonny Styles, like we said, it's going to be interesting to see how a defensive coordinator or defensive head coach does decide to use him. With all that little bit of risk, even though he's that premier athlete, and you can argue he's the best athlete in the draft, I do think those guys are going to go ahead of him. Like I said, for Sonny Styles, I think the combine, for the most part, really put him above Ruben Bain, in my opinion. Like, he can go above Ruben Bain. I said in my Sonny Styles video, I would probably lean Ruben Bain still just because of his ability to crush the position and be the best player, in my opinion, for a Miami team that went to the national championship. It is tough. I do think Sonny Styles definitely put himself in that category to go above Ruben Bain. I think that's what the NFL Combine did for him. But Sonny Styles, again, absolutely killed it, showed the physical freak that he is. Again, the guy that's a size of a Calvin Johnson. and could run the way he runs, could run as fast as, a wide receiver with his 40 time at a 4.46. I think he's going to be extremely versatile in the NFL. And I think, again, if he goes in the right situation for him, he could be one of those guys that have top 3 upside in the entirety of his NFL draft. It's just like, how are you going to be able to use him? And then obviously I compare him to Isaiah Simmons as well. Very similar thing where Isaiah Simmons absolutely crushed the combine. He was a guy that was versatile where he could be used all over the field, and then he didn't pan out. So, again, I do think you're assuming risk with Sonny Styles. But, again, his ability to obviously stick with tight ends at the linebacker position and then being able to defend running backs and possibly able to defend receivers with his athletic ability, his ceiling is through the roof. It's just, again, it isn't as clear-cut how are you going to be able to use a Sonny Styles compared to other players. So Sonny Styles absolutely killed the combine. And then, like I said, touching on Avril Reese as well, killed the combine. But for Avril Reese, I don't really think it mattered much. Obviously, he ran this 4.46, which was first tied with Sonny Styles amongst linebackers. But Avril Reese, the guy, the combine didn't really matter for him. We saw everything with Avril Reese in the 3-4 years at Ohio State that we needed to. I mean, this is a guy that, again, like I said, is a premier athlete. He's a guy that's going to be able to play linebacker and is going to try to develop at the edge. He's a guy that, again, was going to be 2-3 in this NFL draft no matter what, a top 3 pick. And I don't think the combine really opened up much eyes. The eyes were already on him. But, again, doesn't hurt to run a 4.46 as well at the linebacker position. Also, like I said, I did want to discuss David Bailey because we did just touch on him. David Bailey is a guy that I think, again, kind of very similar to Avril Reese. Didn't really need to prove much in this combine. I do think he's going to be a top 5 pick. I think David Bailey puts himself in his own category in this NFL draft just because, again, we saw Avril Reese, like we said, have the ability to play linebacker and edge. David Bailey is that plug-and-play edge, and I think when you look at defensive players with the highest floor, David Bailey is definitely up there with a Caleb Downs, the guy that crushes position, a guy that plays a super impactful position and is that plug-and-play. Like I said, he ran this 4.51 as the fastest edge in the combine. I think this is kind of one of those things where it's just like an icing on the cake type of thing. Like, he was the fastest edge. We know how fast he is on the edge. We know why Texas Tech was one of the best defensive teams in the entirety of college football last year. And then being able to be, like I said, a plug-and-play edge that has a super high floor. I think he's going to be a top 5 pick for sure, but doesn't hurt being the fastest edge, solidifying that. Where else do I want to go? We did talk about Ruben Bain, actually, so let's talk about Ruben Bain in this NFL Combine. We're going to talk about Ruben Bain and the short arm length dilemma. I'm not going to lie to you guys, with Ruben Bain, I do think him having a short arm length definitely is impactful to his draft stock. When we look at Ruben Bain, this was a guy in the middle of the year that was slotted as a top 3 pick, and now he falls a little bit. I do think he's going to be a back-end top 10 pick now. Now, again, I do think Ruben Bain is going to be a great player. I don't think the short arm lane is going to stop him from being a really good edge rusher in the NFL, and obviously he plays his premier position, and he crushed it this year. But I do think when you look at tape, sometimes he does get jammed up because of his short arms, and it is going to impact him plays in the NFL for sure. It did make him fall a little bit from a top 3 pick to a top 10 pick, but I do think he's going to be a great player in the NFL. I don't think it's going to impact him in the sense where he's going to be a bust, but I do think it definitely did make him drop a little bit, the short arm length. I did want to touch up on that very briefly. Another guy I do want to talk about that I think one of his combine test really did do a lot for him in the sense of, again, answer a lot of questions with this guy. We're going to talk about D'Angelo Ponds. I think pound for pound, D'Angelo Ponds is the best cornerback in this draft. The issue is with a guy with the size of D'Angelo Ponds at 5'9", obviously he's going to have strict limitations. But when you look at a national championship winning team in Indiana, I do believe he was the second best player. Like I said, I do think pound for pound, he plays a lot more physical than he is. When you look at 5'9", I do think the biggest thing D'Angelo Ponds showed up in this NFL Combine was this 43.5 vertical, tied for best time in the last 3 years for a secondary player. I think this is huge for him. Him showing the ability to be able to play bigger than his size, showing the ability to get up against some of these bigger wide receivers. Obviously, he's going to have limitations being 5'9", but he shows that he plays more physical and he has the ability to expand his size even more. I think this was huge for D'Angelo Ponds. I do think D'Angelo Ponds with his size, and again, just that being a limitation, is probably going to go in the second round. Maybe with this 43.5 vertical, he could hop into the back end of the first round. I kind of just don't think it's going to happen, though, because then again, when we look at receivers that are 6'3", 6'4", 6'5", obviously he's going to struggle with them, having elite skill sets, those type of guys. But I do think D'Angelo Ponds is just too good of a football player, and he answered a lot being hit 5'9", having this 43.5 vert that was a historically good vert for secondary players to get drafted in the first 2 rounds of the NFL draft. Again, like I said, with this Indiana national championship game, I thought he was the second best player on that team. So I do think that was huge for him. I do think, again, putting up this 43.5 vert at the size that he is shows that he could play a lot bigger than he is. And I do think D'Angelo Ponds is a great corner. Obviously, he's going to have limitations, like I said, with the size. But I do think he's going to go in the first 2 rounds of the NFL draft, and he solidified that with that vert. Another guy I do want to talk about as we're wrapping this thing up is Diego Pavia. Diego Pavia, in my opinion, again, we could talk about how, again, if you're physically gifted and you're ways away being a quarterback, the NFL Combine could definitely help you being drafted. For Diego Pavia, the NFL Combine absolutely killed him, in my opinion. I don't think he looked great in the throwing drills. And then when we look at Diego Pavia, he looked insanely small compared to any other quarterback throwing in this NFL Combine. At barely 5'9", like, Diego Pavia is just so small in stature. Diego Pavia, I think, is a guy really that solidifies himself as not being drafted in this NFL draft. I know it's crazy, him being a Heisman finalist, but Diego Pavia, being as small as he is, not really having any transcendent traits going into the NFL, and then not only that, being the type of player that he was this year, making headlines, I don't think anybody is bringing Diego Pavia in his room. I think the biggest thing Diego Pavia possibly that could happen to him is he's going to go undrafted, and I think maybe for headlines, he can make an NFL preseason roster and throw a little bit there. But Diego Pavia is a guy at his size and, again, with his personality, and I think he just hurt himself in the combine as well throwing the football. I don't think he's a guy that's going to be drafted at all in this NFL draft. Like I said, we are wrapping things up. We're going to talk about a guy that, again, that is ways away as an NFL quarterback when you look at accuracy rise, but I think he absolutely helped his draft stock for sure. And I had this guy in my top 5 video of guys that could really rise in the NFL draft. This is Taylor Green. Taylor Green had an historic combine for a quarterback. When we look at a 4.36 40, this guy is competing with running back times. He's competing with receiver times. When we look at a 43.5 vertical jump, a broad jump at 11.2, these are all records since 2003 for a quarterback. This guy at 6'6" is a complete athletic specimen. I thought he did actually really good throwing the football as well. And when we look at Taylor Green being this gifted of an NFL quarterback, I do think he kind of compares more to like the Joe Milton side of things, where you're going to have to stash this player away for at least 3 years before he ever starts an NFL game, a meaningful NFL game. But Taylor Green absolutely killing the combine at his size. You could convince an NFL scout, an NFL coach that he's not as far away maybe as the public thinks, and he get drafted again in the 4th, 5th, 6th round. I did think he was going to be a guy that was going to go later in like the 5th, 6th round, but maybe he climbed up all the way to the 4th round because he absolutely killed the combine. Taylor Green is a guy I always definitely was enamored with his physical ability, physical traits. Again, has the best physical traits for a quarterback in this draft, you could say. But again, he just weighs away because, again, he did have turnover issues. His touchdown to interception ratio, if you go off all 4 years, was not great. And then when you also look at his completion percentage, he's a guy that's like a low-end 60% completion percentage. And like we mentioned with Drew Aller, if you have a mid-completion percentage where it's like 65%, we could definitely work on those inconsistencies. But 60s is extremely low. But Taylor Green, again, had this historic combine, breaking all records for quarterbacks since 2003. If he can convince a player that he's a coach, that he's not as far away as people think, I think he definitely solidified himself getting drafted for sure. And then, again, how high does he go? 6th, 5th, 4th, all going to depend. But this is a situation where the NFL Combine definitely helps a player like this. Now, another guy I want to talk about that I'm extremely passionate about is Kenyon Sadiq. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I don't know why when I put stuff out on social media, why so many people hate on Kenyon Sadiq. I don't even understand it. I think Kenyon Sadiq is going to be a premier NFL weapon in this NFL draft. I think running this 4.39 40, that's the fastest since Vernon Davis in 2003, definitely solidifies him as a first-round pick. I think Kenyon Sadiq could quite honestly do it all. I think he's a great NFL tight end prospect. When you look at it, this 4.39 40, linebackers cannot cover this guy. When you look at how physically gifted he is running this 40, definitely secondary players can't guard him. He's a mismatch on the field. Then also when we look at Oregon having this depth at the running back position, he showed his willingness to block. I don't think he's an A-plus blocker, but he definitely can run block as well. I think Kenyon Sadiq is the perfect tight end prospect to throw on any team. I think he opened a lot of eyes here in the NFL Combine, and I don't understand why people hate on him. I guess the only thing that I could really see why people hate on Kenyon Sadiq, he was injured throughout the year again, so his stats aren't as gaudy as people may like. But again, running this 4.39 40 shows that really at his size, nobody can guard him on the field. Like I said, way too big for secondary players, way too fast for linebackers. He has the willingness to block. I don't understand how there's not more hype on Kenyon Sadiq. I absolutely love Kenyon Sadiq. I think he's going to be a great NFL player. I think he's 100% worthy of a first-round pick, and I think he could 100% be a top 20 pick as well. I don't understand it. If somebody wants to comment below why people hate on Kenyon Sadiq, I would love to know because I really don't understand it. Now, as we wrap down to the end of things, we are going to talk about what a lot of people believe to be the best player in this NFL draft. We're going to talk about Jeremiah Love. Jeremiah Love absolutely kills his 40 time. This was a guy that did not need to run the 40 at all. He's a guy, like I said, that has the argument to be the best player in this NFL draft. He runs a 4.36 40, solidify himself as one of the fastest running backs in the NFL draft. He runs the fastest 40 time, and he absolutely did not have to. The funniest thing about Jeremiah Love running this 4.36, as you see his dad pissed off, and the first time as he runs a 4.37, he still wasn't that happy that he ran a 4.36. Jeremiah Love absolutely killed it here. And when we look at Jeremiah Love being able to run in between the tackles, being an elite pass catcher too as well, like running this 4.36 just shows how great of a prospect he is. This was a guy that we definitely had in the top 10. Now he climbs up to be a top 5 pick because, like I said, he has the argument to be the best player in the draft. We talk about how the Giants were interested in him. We didn't talk about how the Titans are interested in him as well. I mean, they view him as the best player in the draft, and put a premier player like this on offense next to Cam Ward, a guy that had no shot last year as the first pick. Putting a guy like this could be phenomenal for them as well. Jeremiah Love, I really do believe we're getting into top 5 pick territory with him, which he absolutely deserves. He did not need to run this 40. He runs the second fastest 40 among running backs. And again, like I said, him being able to run in between the tackles, and then also him being able to be this elite pass catcher. Jeremiah Love is a guy that we're talking about now as generational running back prospect. That wraps up the guys for me that really stood out in this NFL Draft Combine. This wraps up me really covering the NFL Draft Combine. Drop down below who impressed you the most that maybe eyes were not on necessarily in this NFL Combine. That wraps up the episode of Sloppy Saturdays. Now we translate with these NFL prospects into their pro days, and we are out.